and I use it often when I am making these when I'm making trading decisions, or at least checking up on an analysis. What I have noticed often, and let me turn on the whiteboard, is that when an FLD forms a trough, so let's start at the shortest FLD. When an FLD forms a trough, and here you can see the FLD forming the trough, the 10-day FLD forming a trough here, what tends to happen is that price exists at the next FLD longer level. What's the next FLD longer level? This is the 10-day cycle FLD forming a trough. Next FLD longer is the 20-day cycle FLD. What very often happens is that on that day, price crosses the next FLD up, and you probably can't see that. So let me zoom out and explain it to you in even greater detail. Right, there we go. There is the trough in the 10-day FLD. When the 10-day FLD forms a trough, you expect price to actually touch the next longer FLD. What's the next longer FLD? It's the 20-day FLD, which is doing that. Okay. Yesterday, when I was taking a look at the markets, I used this particular little tip to realize that price was very likely on this day, was very likely today, it was very likely to come down to this level, because very often when an FLD forms a trough, the price itself will come down to the FLD of the next longer cycle. Okay. Now, this is a tip that I'm just sort of throwing at you. It's a really useful little tool that I use often, and I hope that you that you will as well. To fully understand it, there are many things you need to understand, which largely have to do with underlying trend, of course. There are occasions when this significantly fails and price does not reach does not reach that FLD. I don't have time to go through all the little details now, but I'll throw the idea out to you, and perhaps next week we can speak about it in a little more detail. And I can give you some of the occasions where this particular thing does not work. Okay. Now let's take a look at what that means is likely to happen in the next short while for the markets. Okay. Okay, Helen. Yes, it's a really useful tip that I just use on a personal basis. There are quite sort of complex reasons why it sometimes fails, which I should explain to you, but I'll have to do that next week to sort of fully explain it. But let's take a look at the same idea in terms of what might be happening in the next week. Okay. If we take a look at the next FLD up, that is the 20-day cycle FLD. Now, the first thing to realize is that the trough that you identify in the FLD must be also a trough of the price of that particular cycle. So if you look at the 20-day FLD, and there I can highlight the 20-day FLD. There are two troughs. There's a trough here, and there's a trough over here, and there's another one over here. Okay, so oops, let me just do that. Okay, I've highlighted the wrong FLD, but never mind. Let me trace out the 20-day FLD here, because this is a really useful tip that I hope that you're going to be able to use to make some informed trading decisions. Right, that's the 20-day FLD based on the low price that I've drawn on the chart. Now, as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3 potential troughs. Okay. Now, this tip that I've just given you, that you look at the next longer cycle, only applies when the trough in the FLD is based on a trough of that cycle, the 20-day cycle. So, where is the trough of the 20-day cycle? Now, here's the trick. Okay, we don't actually know where it was, because if you take a look at this FLD, of course, this trough in the FLD has been projected forward from this trough in price. Okay, and then let me draw a cross there. That cross in price has projected forward to that cross in the FLD. And then I'll draw a square. That square in price has projected forward to that square in the FLD. Okay? So now, here is my tip. Again, just so that it really you really absorb it. When the FLD, based on the low price, forms a trough, which is projected from the trough of that cycle in price, okay, then price is very likely to cross the cycle, the FLD of the cycle 1 degree longer. Okay, so let's see. Here there was a trough in the FLD on this bar here. There we go. Okay, let me clear the whiteboard and start again, otherwise it's going to become a huge mess. All right, let me draw the FLD again. This is all I'm going to have time for today. But this is, I think, a really useful tip. Okay, here is a trough in the FLD. Does this tip of mine apply in this case? Well, the first thing is that FLD has to be projected from the trough that is a trough of the 20-day cycle in price. Is that a trough of the 20-day cycle in price? If you look at this analysis, this FLD has been projected from that trough in price over there. If you look at this analysis, you can see that that is currently being phased as a trough of only 5-day magnitude. So no, it isn't. Okay, so we don't expect that to occur. Did it occur? No. Price was nowhere near the 40-day FLD, which is way off the top of the chart. It's over there somewhere. Okay. Let's look at the next trough, and I'll draw a square around that trough in the FLD. Is that FLD is that trough in the FLD projected from a trough in of the 20-day cycle in price? Well, it might be, but here's the trick: we don't know yet whether that is the case. Okay. But if it is, then we would expect price on this day. And what day is this? This is the 4th of June, okay, which is, I think I'm right in saying, next week, Monday. Okay, if it is, then we would expect price, and there are a few other disqualifiers which I'll go through next week, because there won't be time today. But we would expect price to touch that FLD of the 40-day cycle. And so let me clear the whiteboard and work out exactly where that trough of where the 40-day cycle is at that particular point. Okay, 4th of, there we go. All right, so let me just go through it again. There's the 20-day FLD. Right, now we're considering this trough over here on the 4th of June. If that is genuinely the FLD of the 20-day cycle from the 20-day cycle in price, then we would expect price to touch the 40-day FLD, which on that day, the 4th of June, is right up here. Okay, it's right up at well over 4,200. Okay, so one possibility for what might happen next week is that price will suddenly jump up and form a peak form a peak somewhere around about the 4,200 or above level, because it needs to touch that 40-day cycle. Okay, that's one possibility. I mentioned that there were 3 troughs. We've considered 2 of them. Here's the next one. Let me draw a square around it. That is the next trough of the 20-day cycle. Now, if that is if that trough is projected from the 20-day cycle trough, then we would expect price to touch or be at the 40-day cycle level on that day. Now, that day is only 3 days later, the 7th of June. Okay, where is the 40-day cycle FLD on that day? And here's the bad news for the Australian market. It's over here. Can you see it? I've done so much drawing on this chart, you probably can't see it. Okay? So, in other words, if that is projected forward from the 20-day cycle trough in price, then in fact we would expect price to be at this level on the 7th of June. Okay? So now we have a really useful little indication to help us accurately place the trough of the 20-day cycle. If on the 4th of June price gets above the 4200 level and touches the 40-day cycle FLD over here, which is not impossible. I've got to say I think it's unlikely. It's not impossible. If price does do that, then this little tip will help you to very accurately position the 20-day cycle trough. Okay. If, however, that doesn't happen, then we would expect price on the 7th to be to touch this level at below the 40-50 level. So there you have a really interesting projection for next week about what might happen on Monday, and if it doesn't, then what to look out for next week, Thursday, when of course we'll be doing another Oz Trader chat. So I'll catch up on this little idea next week. And with that, I didn't get to take a step back and look at the longer term, bigger picture, but that's fine. I had a lot of fun talking about FLDs. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Next week we'll carry on talking about some of the intricacies of these FLDs and in particular this tip. And I have several other tips about how to use FLDs to very accurately project where price might be in the very short term. Which have to do with how multiple FLDs work together. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's Oz Trader chat. Thank you very much for being with me today. Thank you for your interest in Sentient Trader and of course in Hurst Cyclic Principles. And I look forward to seeing you next week on Oz Trader chat, or next week on Wednesday for Sentient Trader chat. We have some exciting stuff coming up next week in Sentient Trader chat. I'm going to be speaking about the new version 3 of Sentient Trader. Which has a lot of exciting new features, including click to trade and lots of exciting things. So we're going to be doing that. I see a question or a comment from Jitendra. Usually Euro, S&P, and SPI SPY have been moving in sync. From yesterday's chat, where we are expecting Euro to rebound, the SPY seems to be diverging in cycle terms. Yes, exactly, Jitendra. As you say, very often Euro, S&P, and the SPY will move in sync. In fact, markets around the world move in sync. That's what is the principle of commonality, what is called the principle of commonality. And the trick, of course, is to identify the moments when they're not perfectly in sync. Generally, the long-term picture, they will be in sync. The real trick